Okay, properties of light: quantity, quality, color, and direction. The three examples here on the screen have to do with the direction of light. So the first example is more front or top light. Notice it's almost shadowless. When we have three-dimensional subjects and we are capturing them in a two-dimensional camera, shadows help us add to that dimension and make it look more realistic. So we're always wanting to enhance the shadows and find the best light for our subject. The middle picture is an example of backlight. So the light is behind the poppy, casting shadows from the stamens in the center onto the petals in the front. The third image is side light, and hopefully you can identify the light is coming from that left side. Light can be described as quantity, quality, color, and direction. So we're going to explore that just a little bit more here to help prepare you for capturing light better. Quantity of light, pretty simple. It's just a lot of light or less light. But it's important to remember that our eye is drawn to the brightest spot in a frame. So when you capture that image, and where the light is placed is where your viewer is going to look. So you can intentionally compose an image to draw them in or out in different areas of the frame just by where the light is placed. Quality of light is generally referred to as hard or soft. Soft is often referred to as diffused as well. So the two examples here, hard light is pretty easy to identify. You can see defined shadows. So like the mud pots here, on the picture on the left, you can see the defined shadows. They're very long shadows, so you know that it's probably late in the day or early in the morning. Whereas the image on the right is shadowless. It's so diffused, and that was based on cloud cover. Some examples of hard light, where sunlight works for an image, especially the image on the left, illuminating the surfer very nicely. Had he been turning the other direction and I was on the other side, it would have been a backlit photo. And especially with him in a black suit and the light coming from behind, it would have been very difficult to expose for his face. Whereas now I have a nice capture of his face as well as the waves. The image on the right is a wedding photo. And if someone just says their wedding is in the middle of the day in Flagstaff and we're wearing cowboy hats, you're going to have to deal with harsh shadows and hard shadows. So other than using fill flash, there's not a lot you can do except to try to know where they're walking down the aisle, know where you can get in the best position to get the best shot. Examples of soft or diffuse light. So many of these are based, all of these are based off of cloud cover. That's one of your best natural forms of diffuse light. However, if you have small subjects, you can also use a diffuser and add the soften the light by yourself. So here's some examples of manipulating the light, especially their small subjects at a local nursery here in Flagstaff. So the first image on the left is just direct sunlight, middle of the day, and that's how the flowers were. The second image, I added a diffuser between the sun and the flowers. And notice how much richer the colors become. Notice how less harsh because you have less contrast. And there are still shadows, so we still get the three-dimensional feel, but those shadows are much softer as you look at each of the petals and underneath the flowers themselves too. The third image is an example of, I still used the diffuser, but then I went ahead and added a warm reflector to add a little bit of warm light down underneath. Not necessarily what I would always do, but it gives you an example of what is possible, especially with smaller subjects. Another example of diffusion, just to see it in action with a small subject, is just holding that diffuser so you see the before and after of the blue grape hyacinths and how much more detail and saturation you can get when you have a diffused image. And then we move on to the color of light. So you have cool tones, your blues, some purples, well, not a lot of purple, but some purples, greens, but mostly blue. This comes from after sunset and before sunrise. So if you stay out there long enough, you'll get some really nice tones, as opposed to warm light, where your rich yellows and reds at the time of sunrise and sunset is when you can find these most. So most of the properties we've discussed so far, some are a little harder to control when it comes to the color of light. It's just what you're capturing unless we start working in a studio. But what you can control is the direction of light. So as we look at the different directions, you can walk around your subject to find the best, most complementary light for that subject. So here's an example of front or top light. And I'm sure you can imagine if I walk to the other side of that car, that it's going to be much darker green. It's going to be more of a silhouette aspect and probably a little less complementary. Whereas here I really wanted to show the lines and the curves on the car. So I chose the front/top light. Food photography is almost always captured either as backlight or as side light. You definitely want some shadows to add some depth and dimension to the food to make it look appetizing. When it comes to the color, you always want to have an appropriate white balance or food will not look very tasty. And side light almost always is what is used when it comes to portraiture, some form of side light. There's several different lighting patterns, but they all incorporate a more dominant light off camera, off to one of the sides, whether it's loop or Rembrandt or broad light. And because again, we're trying to get the shadows, we want to have complementary shadows to complement that subject and add depth to the frame. Multiple examples here of just showing the difference in light. So this is a feather, a macro image, and all I've done between image 2 and image 3 is change the light. So image 2, the one in the middle of the picture here, is front lit, whereas the last picture is backlit. Notice how much more striking and dramatic the backlit photo looks, especially when it comes to a feather. And so just by changing the direction of light, you'll get a completely different perspective of your subject. So that's it for today. We talked about the properties of light, both quantity, quality, color, and direction. And as you look at the examples here on the screen, just by being patient and waiting for the sun to drop a little bit more can give you a much better image as well. Better when it comes to the quality, the quantity, and the color in particular.